Welcome back to another edition of the Slipstream Podcast. Sadly, there was no race this past weekend, but that doesn't mean that there still isn't plenty to talk about in the world of Formula One. For this week's episode, we're going too wide in the Slipstream with myself, Brady, and Stin to discuss all the latest news and noise from the week of Formula One and take a look ahead at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix at Jeddah coming up this weekend. So, Stin, first, do you think the FIA or Formula One installed the anti-missile systems around the track this year?
There was such a concern last year. There was active bombings within 7 miles of the track. I just remember, was it last year? Yeah, it was race 2
it was last year.
Yep. Come on, it's been a while. We want the racing. We need the racing back. Please don't take it away. I don't know. I'm hoping everything's okay.
Yeah, I'm hoping a lot calmer around the track this year. I had forgotten about that till earlier this week when I was reading about it, and there was some considerations from the drivers to protest the event, not actually participate. So thankfully that didn't happen last year, and hopefully there are some calmness around the track this year. So getting into it, I know I missed the pod and the Bahrain race recap episode last week. I was definitely bummed to miss that, but I took a listen. You guys were all in on Red Bull and Aston Martin. I'm curious, now that the dust has settled, it's been a week later, has anything changed in your mind? Do you still really believe Aston could compete for maybe P2 in the Constructors, or was that just a in-the-moment reaction?
So I'm trying to rewind. I think I was a little bit more bearish on Aston Martin because I don't think Stroll is as good as either the other two second drivers on those teams. So I think that Alonso, he'll get top 4, I think, in drivers, but I don't know if that equates to a 2 in the Constructors. But I don't even George. Did you see George's interviews this week about pretty much saying that you can just go ahead and give the championship to Red Bull? Red Bull's not going to lose a single race this year, which you would need a lot of luck to have happen. But if they aren't unlucky with how things look right now, it could happen.
Yeah, and I know since I wasn't there, I didn't really get to elaborate on it. I mean, seeing Alonso in the top 3 was amazing. If that happens throughout the whole season with his driving style, with Max and the others, it's going to be entertaining. I think everyone realizes that. On
merit, though. He even said it on Drive to Survive. I think maybe it was just the post-race interview where, his Canada, front grid starting position was a rainy track. And his last other podium, right, was Qatar. And that was just a track that really wasn't good. That was the second or third to last race in the third to last race, right, in the 2021 season when it was down to the wire with Lewis and Max. It was just, it's a MotoGP track that's not really built for those cars. He qualified really well and there was hardly any overtaking. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that wants to believe that Aston really will compete for the top 2-3 places. I don't know. I mean, I try to sit back and think there are so many tracks on the Formula One circuit, and they're all different. And so maybe, just maybe, Bahrain was the perfect fit for the Red Bulls, and you can call Aston Martin a Red Bull. I know that Checo had some fun with that when he said it's nice to see 3 Red Bulls on the podium. Obviously, there's some similarities, and the inspiration of the design is very Red Bull-esque. I think the Red Bull will certainly be a powerhouse on almost any circuit. I don't know that about Aston yet. I also didn't think that they would get a podium in week 1. So surprise, surprise. Jeddah is definitely a very different track. The street circuits are very different tracks and different circuits. So I don't know. I want to buy in on Aston Martin. I want to buy all the stock. Lawrence Stroll talks about how he wants to make a bigger investment in Aston Martin now, and they're clearly doing something right. They had, I don't even think you could argue that they had the best winter break. So I'm super excited to see what they do this weekend and if it's legit or not.
Yeah, there's also some rumors going around that Williams might be one of the other best progressed teams. but I saw something that said that even though they started out pretty good this year, they might have already shifted all time and funding to developing the next year car. So here's where I said that, like, this is where you might see that snowball effect, where you have a team just completely pull back. And now if Williams is developing a car over 2 years or maybe even 2.5 years, right? That now they have, let's call it 300% wind tunnel time. Mm-hmm. If you're amortizing it across those 2.5 years, and you've got those lead constructors that are only doing that, 80%, 90%, and they're kind of changing concepts here or there and only revising slightly. Look at Aston Martin. They jumped exponentially. Were they fifth last year in the constructors?
Aston was seventh,
even better. And
they tied Alpha, but they were behind them, I think.
And they shouldn't be lower than fourth by any stretch of the imagination, and could, in theory, get up to second.
Yeah, look, sign me up. I think we've talked about this. I mean, I think, everyone appreciates Fernando as Fernando. Like, we know what we're getting with Fernando. He's gonna drive aggressive. He's gonna be himself. He's gonna be the bad guy. He's fun to watch driving a car, and that's what he loves to do. So I'm all for, and I hope he's there the whole season. It is a long season. This is, what I was thinking about, over the week, not being able to be on the podcast, is that, the Formula One, it's 23 races. It's 8 months. There's so many things that can happen, that can change. Mm-hmm. And to your point, I mean, part of these new regulations with the disparity in wind tunnel time at some point has to, even out, or I mean, that's the intent, right? So there's been quite a few articles this week coming out where you'd already mentioned this, where George was like, oh, Red Bull's going to win every race. And everyone's like, I don't think so. Like Jensen Button's like, I don't think so. People are like, it's not going to be a cakewalk for Red Bull.
Yeah.
I think people hope it's not, but they've even said that eventually as the season goes on, they're going to have less wind tunnel time. So they might have the best car right now, but 6 months from now, who's to say that someone like an Aston or Ferrari can't at least catch up, and maybe Mercedes figures it out with their Plan B concept. So,
yeah, I mean, look at the Ferrari kind of being a step ahead of everyone at the beginning of last year, and then you fast forward, and I know that you made the comment earlier about like every track is different. Look at Brazil last year. Like Brazil, the last 2 years has been an unbelievable Mercedes track. When you look at the 3 years prior, it was a Red Bull track. So, like, it's interesting that Brazil, now high altitude, suited Mercedes really well. Also, if you think about high altitude Mexico, Hamilton got second. Checo couldn't get by him. So Mercedes, who had this long-standing fundamental flaw at high altitude, figured out the engine issue. And you made another good point about, how the tracks are different. Like, I think maybe it was Jensen even said that, like, the first 3 tracks couldn't be any different. Like, you've got Bahrain at night, the most abrasive track in the, in the circuit or in the calendar. You've got Saudi, which is the fastest, second fastest track, the fastest street circuit. And then you've got Australia, which surprisingly is the 3rd fastest track on the calendar, but much fewer like slow, turns, a lot more high speed stuff that they kind of changed that whole sector 2, sector 3 transition. But I would not have guessed that Austria was the 3rd fastest track last year. Or sorry, Australia.
Yeah, maybe with that change in sector 2, like you said, maybe, opened it up a little bit. They got rid of that one chicane. Yeah, so that's where I'm more hesitant on sort of the hot takes. I think we don't really. I think what we know for sure is that it's Red Bull's season to lose, their championship to lose. I think that everyone will agree with. Now, do they run away with it? I don't know. I still, if we look ahead to Saudi Arabia a little bit, I think it's a track where the Ferrari might, at least in qualifying, be able to be right there. They were faster in the straight, I believe. They kind of sacrificed some of their downforce that they had last year for more straight line speed. This is definitely a faster track. There's less slow corners like Bahrain, which is really where, the Red Bull and the Aston Martin excelled in Bahrain. So yeah, I think this will be a very different test for the teams. You also mentioned that Bahrain's incredibly abrasive. Saudi Arabia is one of the smoothest tracks out there. So the tire deg differential that you saw Mercedes struggle with and a few other teams, I think Nico Hulkenberg said Haas was going through tires like butter and bread at that track. So there'll be things like that are just different with this track. So, I think we don't really know everything yet, other than Red Bull's obviously the leading horse.
Yeah, and it's cool that you see, Red Bull and Ferrari, kind of those two top teams, at least last year. It could be this year, maybe not, have gone in opposite philosophy directions that they did last year, right? Like Red Bull was the fastest car in a straight line, the most efficient aerodynamically, while Ferrari was the just had the best fundamental body aerodynamics and was the most efficient at low speed. And that's why they were so quick out of corners, because they had such mechanical grip. So Ferrari from, that 1 to 150 was untouchable. And then as soon as you got over that point, Red Bull literally just blew right by them.
Yeah, that's kind of the only thing Mercedes improved, it looks like, this year is that their top line. Their straight line speed's better. I mean, they definitely didn't seem to have that last. I'm not saying it's not at the top, but it seems to be a little better than last year.
But it's still even slower than Aston Martin. So Aston, who has a Mercedes engine, right, is faster than the Mercedes Works team, who makes all of their own stuff.
Yeah, one of my favorite memes that was going around last week was a video of Toto walking down pit lane and saying he's going to take the engine out of the Aston or something like that. Because they've got, 4 main parts, I believe, of that Aston are all Mercedes parts. So, yeah, so let's stay on Mercedes just for a second. You already mentioned what George said. George said Red Bull's going to win every race. Toto said it was the worst week of racing ever, which is obviously an exaggeration. They didn't listen to me in the off season. Lewis starts coming out with these comments. Radical changes are coming. They've got something planned for Imola. What's your take on that? Are they literally down in the dumps, or do they know that they have something coming and they're trying to downplay it a little bit?
I mean, I have so many opinions of the Mercedes team. I'll try to kind of bob and weave and pick what I choose to say. So if you look at the 2023 Bahrain qualifying, it was 1.2 seconds apart in Q1 from all 20 competitors, right? Red Bull ran away with the race, and they were told early, lap 7 or so, start managing. Like, there's no race, don't start racing. And everyone's upset about it. If you look at the 2014 season with the new turbo hybrid regulations, do you know how much the Mercedes won pole by? Was it over a half a second or a second? It was over a second.
Was it really?
From the next closest constructor. So while I understand that, like, it's a down year, it's been a down era so far. I mean, I think any year that Mercedes doesn't win a championship is a down year for them. So clearly, I understand the positioning of, like, this is the worst year thus far because we might not be third in the constructor. Like, I totally get that. But if you were to ask 6 other constructors if they could have Mercedes problems, they would absolutely say yes.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And sort of to make combined points from earlier to what you just said too. I mean, I think one thing that people get lost on a little bit with Red Bull's dominance last week, they ended last year obviously with the best car. So they had the best starting place for this year and made some subtle tweaks. They talked about how they had a particular focus on what they were trying to accomplish because they have limited wind tunnel time. So they started in the best place. Mercedes talked a lot about how it took them however many months just to get to a place where they could start to develop the car once it stopped bouncing. And they've solved that. So it's Mercedes. I mean, they improved throughout the year last year also. You talked about Brazil. They were pretty competitive by the end of the season. So I think there's got to be some belief that they're going to figure this out too. And, there's chatter about their concept or the B concept, and there will be a visual change to the car coming, I believe, at Imola. So we'll see. There's also some rumors. I don't think this has been confirmed. Is that they're bringing James Allison back, who was the mastermind from 2017 to 2021, built maybe some of the greatest cars in Formula One history, or most dominant cars in F1 history. And so they brought him off the boat. He was designing sort of the Cup of America's boat for them, sailboat. And there's rumors that they're going to bring him back and that he's working on this new concept. So if that's true, to me, it says they are concerned about the direction they're going if they're going to bring someone like that back. But I still believe they'll figure it out and they'll be in the top three. Will they win races again this year? Maybe. But you're right. All is not lost just because of one race. There's a long way to go.
And you'll start seeing too, and we've already started seeing it, and I've made comments of it. Like, it was cool at the beginning of last year where you have all of the teams show up with a very different approach. Haas is kind of with the Ferrari, and then you've got just a lot of fluctuation and variance. And then you show up this year and you still have Red Bull on one end, and you've got Aston Martin right next to it. And then you've got completely on the other end, Mercedes. And then on the other side of that triangle, you have Ferrari. There's still three different concepts. And it seems like a lot of the concepts are leaning towards the Red Bull and the Ferrari side of that triangle. And it could be amazing for Mercedes if what they are developing pans out and works, because they will be that far ahead of people. But the issue is you have six other teams developing the same concept of car. So even though Red Bull's only using 80% wind tunnel time or whatever the heck the number is, if you've got, the number one constructor, the number 5, 6, 7, and 8 constructor all going towards the Red Bull concept, they're all helping develop Red Bull's car. So even though they might not be the first adapter of that technology or the components, copycat league, if that wing that Aston Martin brought out in Hungary is only applicable to the Red Bull model, Mercedes is now out even further to the rest of the grid.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, the sort of copycat is you're not spending the time to develop it, figure it out, and do the science and physics and all that stuff behind it, right? You're just, oh, here's a picture, here's a CAD drawing, let's do it too. It's a kind of shortcuts that process. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, I think the smartest move that Red Bull can do is spend all of your time developing components that no one else can see. Yep. Work on your engine, work inside the car, work underneath the car, and do stuff with the ground and make sure your ground is solid. Because we heard it, and I said it with the whole Silverstone race where Max had a little bit of underbody damage and his race was over. He was barely a midfield car at that point. If you can develop all of your time to the parts that no one else can see, you can start copying the other things that people are developing that you can see. So your development can go a lot further.
Yeah, and I saw something recently too that it suggested that even before these new regulations, Red Bull was much better at sort of the ground effect than some of the other constructors. So once they had a ground effect car as a regulation, they had the experts in place to develop this car, and maybe that's one of the key reasons why they are where they are. They dominated last year, they dominated race one this year, and the Mercedes team talked about how they still are too draggy, and some of the stuff was suggesting that the biggest improvements they can make is with the floor. So, but you're right, you can't see it, so you can't copy it unless it gets lifted up.
Not until the car
right?
is crashed and is on that crane and being lifted up can you see the bottom of the vehicle. But people are getting innovative this year too. I think Sam Collins was talking about on the Tech Talk that they're starting to add wire. Did you see this? To the floors? So you have to be a certain size, a certain dimension, a certain distance from sidewalls, from all of those other things. Some of the teams, I can't remember who it is now. Maybe we can go back and find it. But some of the teams have started trimming back the floor, but adding a very strong, stable wire that's on a track system that defines the edge of the floor system, even though that's not the fiberglass or carbon floor. So you're already getting innovation in that way to develop a car that fits more what they want, that is kind of breaking the rules of the regulations, because its profile is still as wide, even though it's not.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. And, that's one of the fun things about Formula One that probably, if you're just getting into Formula One, you don't realize that, all these little things matter, and, innovations happen regularly, and some of them push the boundaries, and, whether or not they're illegal or illegal is not really the appropriate word. It's just, if the regulations didn't think about it and someone kind of, lives in the gray area and they have to come out and say, no, you can't do that. It's still really cool, the amount of stuff that teams figure out and they put in these cars just to get any kind of, milliseconds matter in the sport, and, thousands of seconds matter. So that part's fun.
Yeah, you've got DAS. That was a super ingenious idea where you were able to essentially pull on the steering wheel to increase the length from the steering wheel to the connection rod or whatever, which ended up pulling the front tires toe in more to heat up the tires quicker. Suspension can't move, so that was corrected, but not in the middle of the season. It was, retroactive or, future for the next year. You've got the F ducts, where the drivers would literally like drive down the track with one hand on the wheel, and they would cover up a port that was in the front of the nose that would limit the airflow that came through it. And then when they were back in the turns, they would put their other hand on the wheel to give them more aerodynamics of air coming through the monocoque. FIA said it's dangerous intentionally having drivers drive with one hand. We can't do it. And then you've got the era of the blown diffuser, which is how Red Bull was so great in their early, 09, 10, 11, 12, or 10, 11, 12, 13 regime, where you have, the exhaust is helping with the downforce. So you've put the exhaust in a place where it's creating extra downforce for you when you're on power. Like, amazing innovation, amazing, creativity. And, the people who are willing to push the envelope the most are going to benefit the most. And I love that it is, it's so much different than IndyCar, because it's not all spec. They're building their own cars. They're developing. It's a sheet of paper and they draw it out every year. But it's a shame. I would love to see, like, without a regulation, how fast these things could actually go.
Yeah, and that's an interesting segue to Jeddah. It's one of, if not the fastest circuits on the Formula One calendar. So just a real easy question. Do you like Jeddah? Do you like the Saudi Arabian circuit? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's better than watching Monaco. It's better than watching Singapore. I still think it's new and fresh, and there is some overtaking that can happen. If you look at Monaco, the only overtaking happens in the pits, or if someone just really messes up and Lando's or Nico's it, going towards the casino. Singapore, kind of same thing, at least Saudi. So yeah, it's the third fastest average track, average speed for the track. If you look at top end, average speed and minimum speed, top end speed on qualifying, Perez qualified on pole, 335 kph top end, average speed of 247, which is only 11 slower than Monza, and your minimum speed is 91, which is the fourth highest minimum speed. So turn 1, turn 2 is really the slowest they ever get. Otherwise, we've both raced it plenty of times in the F1 games. It's a fast track. If you mess up sector 1, you're ruined. It's such a flowy, you have to, combo the corners so well. I would like it if the walls weren't so close. I think if you made it feel more open and less like you were in a tunnel, I would appreciate the track more. But I don't know how you would do that. Like, you can't add gravel or whatever because it's a street track.
Well, so I don't know if you've seen it, but they've adjusted a few walls, so they've moved them back, whatever,
Like a meter,
feet.
though.
Yeah, I think the main reason is just visibility, right? I mean, if you're going around one of these high-speed corners and there's a guy sideways, I mean, there's just an airplane crash waiting to happen. I mean, who was it? Checo 2 years ago, or somebody spun out, and I don't know what they did. They restarted from yes, that for sure. But there was also
and Checo plowed into like 3 or 4 people in Sector 1 after that red flag or whatever.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. That's a part of what I love about it. Not the crashes. It's just that, I mean, it's scary in a video game. Like, these guys have to have full commitment in real life, obviously, as they do on every track, but even more so because there are some places where the visibility is limited. And now I know that they've listened to driver feedback. That's why they have made some changes for this year. I don't think they could make many last year because if you remember, Saudi was late in the season in 2021. We obviously had the drama with Lewis and Max and the brake checking and brake testing or whatever late in the season in 2021. And then it was early in the calendar last year. So they didn't have time to make changes. So now that they've had a full year, they have moved a few of those walls back, and they made a few other changes on a few other corners. They even added, I don't know what you call it, like rumble strips on the outside of some of the curbs where, if you drive like now on a highway and you get a little over in the lane, it goes zzz. So they added a few of those to keep drivers, within track limits and make it a little bit more penalizing to miss a corner. So I'm curious to see how that changes the racing, but still, to your point, the vast majority of the track is high speed with very little visibility.
Runoff. So, just do a gut check really quickly. Like Monaco, close, tight, but there's some runoff. Turn 1, like there's a couple places that you can run off and bail, right?
Yeah.
Singapore, there's a couple places you can bail. It doesn't feel completely enclosed. Baku, there's a couple places that you can bail. There's a couple places you can run wide and survive.
Yeah, I'm even trying to think with Saudi. I mean, even if someone, like last week in Bahrain, if, Charles has another engine failure, like where do you pull over? It's like got to be
like
12,
there's a
13.
little bit in Sector 1, right?
Yeah.
And there's a little bit as you're transitioning from Sector 2 to Sector 3. That kind of like after the second DRS spot, the quick left, right, and then you get into the other DRS. Like Saudi feels more to me like Monaco than Singapore or Baku feel like Monaco.
You just mean like the physics of the track, not like the racing element of it, right?
Just how close it is. Just how concealed. There's hardly any space. Like there's a lot more overtaking, I would think. I'm not looking at the stats of it, but it's a fast track. There's got to be more overtaking, but I don't know. Like, did they like re-sign? Didn't they already like renew like 60 more years at that track or something?
Yeah. It's to like 2034 or something. Yeah, well, there was also rumors that, the Public Interest Fund or whatever it is, I think it is the PIF, the Public Interest Fund of Saudi Arabia, was rumored to buy or put in a bid for Formula One. It's the same entity that has created Live Golf, if you follow any of the golf stuff. So yeah, they're going to buy their way into this track staying on the calendar. But I mean, at least it's fun. It's exciting. It's a night race, which is always fun. It's a 1 p.m. start here in Atlanta for us, which is great. Although sometimes those early morning starts are nice too. But it's only been here twice. And I think both races have been exciting for different reasons. I think the first time, like we said, Max Lewis battle, controversy. And then last year, just a lot of overtaking, different racing, different style of racing in Bahrain and different circuit and different results maybe. So I'm excited for it. It is, we talked about this before we started recording, is that it is a bit of a bummer where, Formula One returns and then there's only three races in a 2-month period. So I think we'll take any racing at this point.
And then you have 20 races over 6 months, right? It's very interesting positioning when you look at like these long-term deals that these tracks are getting for, 2032, 2034, whatever, when F1 is supposed to be net zero carbon by 2030. Like completely carbon neutral by 2030, and they're even supposed to be completely 100% sustainable fuel by 2026. So like you're going to these large oil countries, and it's moving away from that direction. So what are you going to do?
It's a bit ironic, but money talks, I guess, right?
It's like all in all from cars too, right?
I saw this. This is sort of related to Formula One, but related to your point. Aramco, who's a big sponsor of Formula One, had like a record-breaking year in profits, like 165 billion in profit. So good for whoever they sponsor, because there's going to be plenty of money coming in. But yeah, I mean,
and if they want to sponsor us, you can sponsor us too. We'll take a little bit. We'll take millions off your hands. That's easy.
Yeah. We don't need 165 billion. We'll take whatever you can have, or whatever you want to offer. So let's just wrap up with this. Give me a sort of what you really think is going to happen this weekend at Jeddah, and maybe a hot take, if you have one.
Oh man, what I really think is going to happen. I think you're going to have the top 4 constructors take 9 of the top, or 8 of the top 9 spots. Someone will have something that happens, whoever it might be. Hot take. Let's go with, let's go Williams double points.
Okay. I like that. I mean, Logan Sargent, I know you guys talked about it last week. Pretty impressive first start. Now, it's his first time. Actually, I take it back. I think he has experience on this track. I think it might be Oscar who does it. It's either Oscar or Nick who have never driven. So I think it's Nick who's never driven. So at least he's got
one more hot take.
Experience. Yeah, go ahead.
Mick will not crash in qualifying.
If that does happen, then there'll be a lot to talk about this weekend somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess I don't know if this is what I think will happen. What I hope happens is that I'd like to see the difference in the track actually matter. Meaning, I'd like to see if Charles can give Max a run for pole. I think Checo even had pole here last year too. So
yeah,
it would just be interesting to see if the Ferrari is better on this track, and obviously if they've gotten their reliability issues or tire deg figured out from Bahrain. Vassauer talked about how they just felt like they had a bad setup for the race, which is kind of crazy to me considering you had testing and practice. So how did you not know that? But anyways, Ferrari is Ferrari. He's got to get all of his screw ups, and I know Matt talked about that on the podcast. You got to get it out early so you're officially a member of Ferrari.
A bad setup isn't part of your car falling off as you start Q1 qualifying, saving a set of new tires to have 2 less laps on the starting of the race, and having your number 2 driver or your second place driver, no, he was third place at the time, third place driver's engine blow up after you replace his battery storage, that you only have 1 more of those this year. Like that's not a setup issue. That's a team setup issue.
You're right. So yeah, let's see if they right the ship. I'm hopeful that this track will lead to some more competitive racing. At least, people like Mercedes won't be 50 seconds behind Red Bull. They still might be, but I could see Ferrari giving the Red Bulls a run for their money this weekend. At least I hope so, if they don't get in their own way. And the other sort of curiosity, we don't really know where the midfield is, like sort of the middle to higher end midfield is going to shake out, right? I mean, Williams is in 7th because they got a point. Pierre had a great recovery race. Ocon had a lot of penalties last week. I don't know if we really know. I mean, Alpine was 4th last year. So are they 5th because of Aston's move up the grid? Can they compete for 4th? There's so many unknowns. I mean, McLaren had a really bad weekend. I know Cole talked about that. There's so many things we don't know. I mean, Haas qualified well, but raced poorly.
That ruined me in fantasy.
Yeah.
I went contrarian just to see, and it's going to be a long year.
Yeah, so, I feel like a lot of people made a lot of hot takes after Bahrain, but I still feel like there's so many things that we don't know. Like I said earlier, I think the only thing that we do know is that Red Bull is going to be great, and we'll see if anyone can keep up or catch them throughout the season. I hope this track, evens it up a little bit. I wouldn't mind seeing Mercedes surprise us a little bit, but I guess a hot take. I'm going to go, I guess it's not a hot take. I was going to say Haas in Q3, but that happened last week. Let's go Williams in Q3. I'll stay on your Williams train. I'll just say Williams makes Q3. Maybe Alex Albon makes it into Q3.
Like as you were talking through that, like I feel like Williams might be able to get to that like 6th spot this year.
That'd be great.
Like, you've got massive movement from 2 of the teams, right? You've got the Williams team potentially and Aston, which looks like they're probably there, which means someone else had to fall hard. And right now it looks like McLaren. They'll probably right the ship. I mean, Zach does a really good job. But we'll see if Alpine can or not.
Yeah, I mean that would be pretty cool. I don't know if y'all mentioned this on last week's podcast. So I'm just going to say it as we've already talked about this the last time we talked about him, but I think after one race, Logan Sargent's already better than Latifi. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah,
he did pretty good for a rookie race. But yeah, so anyways, that wraps up another edition of the Slipstream Podcast. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate your support. Please give us a like and a download. We'll see you guys this weekend to recap the events around the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix and hopefully no missiles this weekend. So with that, see you next time.